All-purpose cleanup speaker. You know, having been a police chief and then serving, because I knew so little about it, they made me the chair of the communications section in the major city chiefs. And then at ONDCP, I can talk about prescription drugs and PDMPs. And I think most of you know I'm in transition. I had a confirmation hearing yesterday for Customs and Border Protection, so I can talk about biometric exit. But I'll tell you kind of a quick funny story. When I was police chief in Fort Pierce, there was a bank robbery and one of our detectives was there, and there were these two guys like in khakis and polo shirts and I don't think it was flip-flops, but I think it was docksiders. So the picture came out, you know, and it said FBI agents and Fort Pierce police at the scene. Who do you think was in the suit and tie? And who do you think were in the dock, or the docksiders and everything? It's the FBI agents. So I have a meeting coming up with Director Comey. I'll tell him how happy you are out in West Virginia and how happy you are not to be in headquarters. Yeah, the two FBI agents said, "Oh my, don't let that picture get out. If they know how happy we are down here, it's going to be a problem." I'm delighted to be back with IJIS and all of you, and Paul and so many of you in the room have been good friends and good partners in a host of the jobs I've had. One of the senators yesterday at the confirmation hearing was kind of cute. I think it was Senator Schumer, who actually is quite a wit, and mentioned something about, yeah, he's had a lot of jobs, he just doesn't stay in them very long. So we'll see how long this lasts, as we say here in Washington, if confirmed by the Senate. So CBP is an interesting shop because I just listened to, and the biometric center stuff is particularly interesting because, as you know, Congress has mandated that Customs and Border Protection develop a biometric exit system. You know, one of the issues on illegal immigration is people that come into the country legally, overstay their visas, and then there's no real information about, well, who really left the United States. And if they did leave, it's usually some biographic information, you know, maybe from an airline ticket or getting on a ship. But there's no real other way. And so Congress mandated a number of years ago that a biometric exit system be developed, and that is unbelievably complex, or could be potentially expensive. So looking at the biometric programs with all the, as we say here in Washington, all the interagency partners is particularly important. Let me mention a couple things about ONDCP. The office has been around since 1988, and Secretary Bennett, Bill Bennett, had been in charge of education and was then with President Reagan was kind of the first drug czar. So we've had everything from a police chief to a four-star general and General McCaffrey, to a Secretary of Education to a governor. And when I was called about the job in 2009, well, actually at the end of the election cycle, and I'd been police chief for almost 9 years in Seattle, which, as most of you know, is a lifetime in a large city. It's about 3 times longer than average. I was really delighted, but I said, gee, maybe you want to talk to me about something in law enforcement. And then they quickly help you understand that they're not the least bit interested in what you are interested in at all. It's really all about them. And I'm so glad. It's been almost 5 years. And the issues around the complexity of the drug problems are just absolutely fascinating. I knew the law enforcement standpoint from a long career in that and having worked in narcotics. But frankly, the whole other issues of drug treatment, drug prevention programs, all of these kinds of things were areas that I was just very weak on and really had to learn a lot. And since that time, it's been absolutely rewarding. And when you look, and I listened to the earlier speaker from the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and we do a huge amount of partnerships with them, particularly on the prescription drug monitoring programs. But when we talk about the last real piece of the data is always, as you know, it's always lagging. But it's $193 billion a year are what the illegal drug problems cost us, just that monetary amount. 38,000 deaths a year, greater than from gunshot wounds, greater now than from car crashes. I mean, it is, you know, it's a huge burden personally on people, their families. I had the opportunity to spend about 4 days in Appalachia. So I've been with a number of members of Congress, West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, Southern Ohio, et cetera. I mean, the drug problem is just like this incredible equal opportunity, hurtful problem to the economy, jobs that go unfilled, good jobs, jobs with benefits. That go unfilled because people can't pass drug tests, as Governor Tomblin in West Virginia was talking to me about. Just, it really is something, and it's something that we can do something about. You know, it's kind of like this self-inflicted wound. So we've been working a lot on what are better prevention methods. How can we get messages out, particularly through social media, to young people, and messages that resonate. You know, there are a few people in the room that you remember some of the ads, like the 2 fried eggs, and this is your brain hungry. Yeah, some of you are old enough to remember that ad. It doesn't work. That, just so you know, that ad wasn't particularly effective. And so when I came in to office on the prevention programs, we said, why don't we take a look at, with a series of focus groups, but also what really is going to help young people get a message that, because prevention it's far less expensive, it makes so much more sense. What can we do to get a message across to them about how to not engage in drugs? One of the things we talk about often in this field is that, you know, if you can keep someone away from drug and alcohol issues until they're 21, the chances of them ever having a drug or alcohol problem are almost nil. So when young people hear that, you know, their parents, it's almost like, well, we'll just lock you up, and at 21 we'll let you out of your room, and then you can go. But we brought in a bunch of folks from Google and other places that really understand social media and really understand young people. And the messages that work, and a lot of you have kids and grandchildren too, the messages that really work to young people aren't messages about, boy, this is really dangerous. Because when you think about it, the dangerous things are the things that are most attractive to young people. Look at extreme sports, those kinds of things that really, it's like the greater the danger, the more attractive it becomes. But one thing that young people really want is to be in control. They want to be in charge. They want to be in control, make their own decisions. And so when we do these social media ads, which we can get out a lot less expensively than a number of the other ads that you really have to pay a lot of money for, when we get those social media ads out that say, if you want to be in control and you want to make your own decisions, drugs and alcohol really impact that. Those are the things that keep you from being in charge. And so you don't have to make these discussions about a particular type of drug, opioid prescription drugs or painkillers or other drugs. Or we're seeing now a resurgence of heroin in this country, which is really troubling because heroin has been aging out in this country for a number of years. Really has been very low on the radar screen. But now with opioid prescription painkillers being less available because of a lot of the steps that have been taken, being more expensive, people are turning back to heroin. But when we don't talk about this in a prevention way as either being dangerous or about a specific drug, we really talk about it in a way that makes an awful lot of sense to a young person, that these things aren't going to allow you to be be in charge or to be in control. And you know, toward the end, I'm happy to take some questions. I can answer questions on all this different stuff, you know, because when you don't hold a job that long, you can kind of move through it. I do want to tell you a couple things. I mean, we have some great partnerships. When General Hayden was the director of national intelligence, and I was a police chief. I was on his advisory committee, and we developed this great partnership with the program manager for information sharing, and that program and that partnership has really continued on. So, you know, I never found, especially as a police chief, I never found any group that was more willing to share their time and their expertise. And even limited funding oftentimes than members of the federal government, because they really knew that state and local partners were essentially value added in protecting the country not only from terrorist threats, but as we go further and further and further away from 9/11, we also had to recognize that things like fusion centers and others had to be almost an all crimes approach. Limited resources. Law enforcement agencies have had their budgets impacted pretty severely. We've seen a lot. I don't think the Bureau is going to have a new agent class till 2015, so it's going to be a while. So the smarter we are about collaborating, sharing information, the better we are. I'll tell you a little bit. One of the programs that we have in the Office of National Drug Control Policy, the HIDAs, high-intensity drug trafficking areas, they've been around since 1990. And those HIDAs are just this incredible regional information sharing program. You know many of the directors of the HIDAs. They have their own boards. We fund them, but and Michael Gottlieb is the national director. So we fund them, but they're really somewhat semi-autonomous because they have a board made up of local law enforcement, both federal and state, and that all combine to give direction to the HIDA. And those HIDAs are well supported and well thought of by members of Congress because they really deliver. When we talk about breaking down barriers, especially after 9/11, when we talked about breaking down information barriers that existed particularly between federal law enforcement and state and local, a lot of people that were involved in that process weren't aware of HIDAs. We probably should have done a better job of getting that information out. But the HIDAs have been around for a while, and you talk about being able to break down those barriers. They really do an incredible job of doing that. So it's not only for the information that should be shared about who's involved in drug trafficking, but one of the highlights of those organizations is the fact that they also do the deconfliction. And for so many years and in so many places around the country, we saw either investigative time that might have been wasted because 2 or 3 or 4 different agencies were all working on the same targets or the same organization and not sharing information, or even worse, we saw raids and arrests and things going on in which it could be blue on blue. So the deconfliction processes that the HIDAs run are just extremely important, not only for law enforcement officer safety, but they're also important for sharing information with limited resources so that the most useful investigative tactics can be put to use on some of these drug trafficking organizations. And we often look at these drug trafficking organizations now as less about drug trafficking, particularly the cartels in Mexico, and more about transnational organized crime, because they really are transnational organized crime enterprises. Their lines of business, the cartels, whether it's duplicating software, movies, extortion, kidnapping, etc., they have really moved out from just drug trafficking. So we often hear people that want to legalize drugs right now, particularly the legalization of marijuana and the movement that is afoot in this country, that this will reduce violence or it'll take money out of the hands of the cartels. cartels are pretty well-run business enterprises. They have lots of lines of business. We really, the research, whether it's the Rand Corporation or others, the research really doesn't prove that legalizing drugs is going to be useful in reducing cartel funding. A lot of things on the border issues. We write in ONDCP something called the Southwest Border Counter-Narcotics Strategy. It has to be updated by law every 2 years. And what we do is to bring all of our federal partners together to the table to go over about what are you going to do and how are you working collaboratively on the Southwest border issues. We hear a lot about the secure border. That comes up often. But what's also important is that the United States, and we have a real responsibility to also reduce the arms that flow south, and also the funds, the bulk cash that flows south, so that when we can look at these enterprises and we can reduce the funding and we can go after the money, or the agencies can go after the money, it makes just so much more sense. And this is all about collaboration. It's all about information sharing. And there's a particularly difficult time. I realize many of the constraints that you all have. Particular state laws. When I was the police chief in Seattle, we had an agreement, an ordinance on our intelligence gathering. It's similar to New York City's handshoe agreement, but it requires an independent outside auditor to review our intelligence gathering and to make reports to the public and make reports about how we're doing our business. So, you know, it's a very delicate balance as law enforcement agencies work together to not only exchange and share information, but also to maintain privacy. Customs and Border Protection has 8 or 10 drones that are used along the border, and the issue around drones and surveillance and privacy are just in the paper every day. And between WikiLeaks and then the information that had been released by Mr. Snowden, this is just a continuing discussion. And it puts you in very difficult positions all the time as you try to uphold your responsibilities to protect people, and knowing that information is the absolute key to that, but also maintaining those very important privacy and civil liberties rights. You have a really difficult task in maintaining all of that. So I would offer to you that, you know, there are not only a number of people that you get to meet and work with here when IJIS holds their conferences, but I would also offer that in your area we have these 28 HIDAs across the country, that if you don't know your HIDA director and you haven't actually worked with him or her, and they come from a wide array of backgrounds, they would be a good resource and a good group for you to be able to connect with. You do an amazing amount of work under really difficult circumstances, and it just seems, particularly over these last couple years, that we're being buffeted by a lot of winds that make the job particularly more difficult, but yet you continue to work through the problems. You continue to make sure that the information that is needed, not only to make those criminal cases or even those civil forfeiture cases, but the information that's needed to protect other law enforcement officers through deconfliction, et cetera, that you do that all the time. And I have, in a very long career now, you know, I just couldn't be more proud of the partnerships that we had, whether it was in Seattle, whether it was in Buffalo, or the time I was in Florida. Just telling you why I couldn't hold a job, but I know about hurricanes, and I know about snow, and I know about earthquakes now. I'm sure there's some other part of the country that suffers a natural disaster that I should become more familiar with, but it's been a good opportunity to visit with you. And you know, if I can, I've got a couple minutes. Happy to take a question. The PDMPs started with very few. I think now we're all but one state. Anybody from Missouri? Or Missouri, by the way? It's the only state that we cannot get a PDMP in, so I really would like to finish that one off. But those PDMPs have really made a huge difference in reducing the opioid problem that exists in this country, and that's why working with BJA and state and local partners has been really a good way of trying to deal with that. So I'm happy to take a couple questions about any of these wide array of areas that I've been involved in. Anything from anybody? Yes?
We wish you well on your confirmation. One of the things that might have come up or will is immigration reform. Maybe that's going to be an activity that happens in 2014. Presently, senators and congressmen are worried about border control. What do you think the priority for Border Patrol might be based on where you are now?
You know, the Border Patrol, the issues with the Border Patrol have been pretty significant. It went from 4,000 to 8,000 to now almost 22,000 Border Patrol agents. The vast majority along the southwest border, but well over 2,000 on the northern border. The Border Patrol has also really worked very hard to do value added through their technology. You know, most of you are familiar with all the issues around fencing and detection and on and on. You know, and I've had about 10 or 11 trips to that southwest border, and until you really get down there and see that vast array, the type of terrain from really, you know, very uninhabitable areas to San Diego and San Ysidro with tunnels. So I think information sharing, one, is going to be key. I think the other part is going to be the use of technology. How do you detect the tunnels? And there have been a number of tunnels, and most often they're detected because a big truck drives over and then falls and sinks. That's the high technology of tunnel detection right now, or intelligence. Or informants and intelligence. So I think the technology for them is going to be real value added. The Senate bill on comprehensive immigration reform has a provision for an additional 20,000 Border Patrol agents. Where that will go in the House and how that will be done, particularly in very tight budget times. But I think it's going to be the technology that's the value added. And not just the boots on the ground. And the other part for Border Patrol is clearly the relationship and that they have not only with state and local law enforcement, but really the relationship with people along the border. And you know, they do. I've been out with them at different times in different locations, and I'm sure in the new job, if confirmed, I'll be spending a lot of time with them in some of those areas. Good. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Taking towards your new opportunity at exiting. A few years ago, I was involved in some of those issues on trying to track who's leaving the country. Trying to track who's leaving the country, and I was wondering what some of your initial thoughts about how to address the complexity of this and where you think this is really going to go versus staying on the books.
Yeah, I think that, and this is about how do you know who left? I mean, it's pretty easy in many ways if you didn't sneak in through between a port of entry. It's understandable to figure out through visas and information who is coming into the country. But then if they overstay, how do you track whether or not they left? One of the think tanks here had a pretty interesting proposition, and that was that when people come in, almost everybody comes in with an electronic device. Why not have a trigger for their electronic device that 5 days before their 90-day visa ends or whatever the time period is, that it begins sending that person, messages saying, we expect to see you at the port of exit, et cetera. Because actually some people, it would be helpful to have that kind of gentle reminder from government. I thought that was pretty interesting. There's a lot of pressure to say, well, gee, how about at the airports? How do you do biometric exit. But as most of you know from visiting an airport, there isn't a lot of extra room. There aren't a lot of places where people can, there's plenty of room to go up and go through TSA. There's not a lot of room then for somebody else to go and give, whether it's an iris scan or a four prints or something else, to be able to track leaving the country. So I think the biographic exit information is increased. But the other part will be when people leave the United States and enter some other country, how can we exchange information on foreign nationals that have left? And right now, there's a pilot program underway, I think with Canada. So when a foreign national leaves the United States, not a United States citizen, enters Canada, that information flows back to us also. So it'll be interesting. But again, I think technology is going to be fascinating. But boy, that difficult balance with privacy and civil liberties. Well, I think I used up all of my time. I think I'm between you and the coffee. I know you're going to have a great conference, and it's good to see so many familiar faces, and I applaud the work that you do. And whatever job I'm in next, if I can be helpful to you, let me know. Thanks.